I think an epidemic, either naturally caused or intentionally caused, is the most likely thing to cause, say, 10 million excess deaths, and that it's pretty surprising how little preparedness there is for it. Now, it's tricky because this is a global problem, so how do countries work together, which countries should put up what resources, and every aspect of it, the resources to go engage in the affected countries, the allocation decisions. As we've seen various flu scares come along, we haven't had a super good response. So the paradigmatic examples are smallpox for an intentionally caused thing, that there was a simulation called Dark Winter that didn't come out very well, i.e. smallpox scored 1 and humanity scored 0. Flu epidemics, where we always talk about the potential recurrence of a 1917 like Spanish flu problem, and then Ebola, which although it was much smaller, there was some luck involved in that because it wasn't spread through respiratory contact. The reproductive rate was a lot lower, and it was basically people who were sick or dead who were doing most of the transmission. And so through a lot of heroic effort and a little bit of luck, it stayed under control and was largely contained to the 3 countries. But that necessarily wouldn't have been the case. In fact, I think the global health community was a bit surprised because that particular pathogen had been seen in rural settings, and so it never got into large numbers. The fact that it could get into an urban setting and then that the reproduction rate would be pretty substantial, that came as a negative surprise.
So Bill, you're excited about the technology innovation that's going on around this sort of RNA area. Could you talk us through where we're at, how optimistic you are that we can really accelerate the process of getting a vaccine developed once one of these potential pandemics is being identified?
Well, there's no licensed product using these technologies, so they're still, in terms of immunogenicity, duration, some questions to be answered. There's early animal data that shows real promise, and there's a lot of entities, government entities, our foundation and others, who've been working with the pharma companies and new entrants like Moderna and CureVac and saying, okay, what types of diseases would this work for? So if the platform comes along, it will be a valuable tool for the ongoing infectious diseases where we still have a gigantic burden. It'll be valuable for epidemics and potentially as a tool to limit the effect of bioterrorism. So it's very exciting, and yet do we get products out in 2 years, 5 years, or does it prove to be more difficult than we expect? There's still a range of uncertainty. It looks strong enough, though, that we feel very good about CEPI as it is picking some particular pathogens to go after. And I think they published the list of the top 3 that they may bid out to the private sector, favoring responses that are using the new platform, since helping prove out the platform would be one of the primary benefits. But we'd also, if we guess right on those 3, we'd have a stockpile of vaccines that, that's kind of a day 0. Well, they don't get there immediately, but it would fall under the 6-week type scenario. And these aren't pathogens that replicate at the same rate that flu does. So it would make a huge difference if we guess right. But even if we don't, the practice of going through that, what was the approval process? What do the cohorts look like? How generic is the manufacturing? If we're trying to get the right immunogenicity, I think it'll be a very key step in the learning curve. And so CEPI's a step forward. People shouldn't think this alone, is an answer to all these unmet needs around epidemics. In fact, there's a lot of other players like the U.S., UK, China, who are concerned about these things, and whether they join CEPI formally or just are working in parallel, we're expecting R&D funding from a lot of other people to be complementary so that ideally 5 to 10 years from now, not only vaccines, but the other tools as well, our speed of response, our understanding of who should do what when, would be dramatically better than any of our recent challenges, even SARS or some of the.
But are you optimistic that we're going to do that?
Well, I think CEPI is a step in the right direction. I think it's too bad in a way that we had to have these epidemics to get us to move, but the timing in terms of the science, the recognition that epidemics don't respect borders, and so whether you're looking at this through a humanitarian lens or a purely domestic lens, these are investments that should be made. I think this is a very positive step.
So we've got time for 2 very brief and clear questions from the audience. Anyone like to say anything? Such a distinguished audience. Here we are in the middle. There'll be a microphone coming to you. Quick. You just say who you are for those who don't know.
Jeff Drazen from the New England Journal of Medicine. So one of the big problems with epidemics is recognizing when it's happening, because you don't get a letter in the mail saying it's now happening. So, and that may be the critical period of time for intervention. By the time we recognize we have a problem, it may be too late. So to what extent do we need to invest in resources to help identify the emergence of something new? And I'm not quite sure exactly what those resources would be, but it seems to me that the timing of recognition so that you can then make the vaccine and deploy is an unknown variable.
You're absolutely right. And I should have mentioned surveillance as another area where the needs are quite dramatic. There are some steps that have been taken in that direction. Our foundation is funding a thing called CHAMPS, which is a series of surveillance sites in developing countries. But that doesn't really cover what needs to be done for surveillance. There also, you have to be careful because the political incentive to declare that you have an epidemic is often works against us, that you want to either hope that it's not or avoid the disruption to trade and commerce that it causes. And so in Ebola, that was another thing that didn't work as well as we would have liked it to. Certainly diagnostic technology is coming along, and that will be an aid in doing this. For example, just take polio, which is a case I know better than other diseases. It's amazing how our understanding of that virus spread today is 90% through sewage surveillance, not through cases, because cases, there's so much time between somebody actually getting the virus, getting paralyzed, getting discovered, that the virus, that one in particular, because it has so many asymptomatic cases, it could have traveled halfway around the globe by the time you look at those cases. But the environmental surveillance, i.e. sewage sampling, gives us not only the detection, but the genetics, so we can understand exactly, as of today, where in Pakistan and Afghanistan it's moving around, and therefore where we need to intervene. So, there will have to be surveillance investments to make sure that's not the missing piece. So it's a very good point.
And a question for Francis Collins. There's a mic coming to you here.
So the panel has talked about Ebola as an opportunity to learn lessons, but we've had another unexpected appearance of a virus on the scene that's caused a lot of worldwide pain, and particularly in this case birth defects, Zika. So I'm curious what lessons you see we've learned from that one that could apply to this larger view of where we need to go next.
Well, I think Ebola in some ways presented in a more classic way with unique symptoms. Zika is still recent enough that the understanding of, okay, should we have seen it sooner? Even understanding what the steady state case looks like in terms of immunogenicity, why it showed up in South America and didn't show up in Africa, I know people are hard at work trying to answer these questions. So the lessons from that one, I'm not trying to minimize that one at all, but I think they're less clear than from Ebola.
But what about lessons for vaccine development?
Well, there's some good, you may be more up to date than I am. I think actually the view is that some of these candidate vaccines actually look fairly promising.
They do.
Sometimes we have a hard time picking which of the constructs to go to what stage of trial. And designing a trial, there's still people can disagree about whether what the Ebola trial design should have been. And I don't know in the Zika case if there is a consensus about what a phase 3 would need to look like.
The DNA vaccine looks pretty good, but Seth.
Seth Berkeley.
So, Bill, at the end,
The high-class audience for questions.
it's an evolutionary certainty that we will have these types of epidemics. Exactly which one and when, we don't know. What I'm interested in a sense, we're preaching to the converted in this room. What do we need to do to get real political leadership? When I say real, I know you've talked about it. There's a lot of discussions at the G7 and G20, but it's not at the level that it has been for other threats. And yet this threat is potentially, trans-global, could kill 50 million people, 100 million people. So what is it going to take? Is it fear, which of course has its own problem? Is it, how do we get that consortium of adequate finance over a sustained period of time to do all we need to do to improve the surveillance and make sure these things are funded going forward?
Well, I think we all want to see that happen. It's hard because budgets are very tight, global cooperation is very tricky. The uncertainties involved are so incredible, I don't think anybody can assign that much of a number to it. The fact that we don't yet have a universal flu vaccine, sort of shows the level of underinvestment, and I think it'd be a good sign if we achieve a universal flu vaccine. That would show a step in the right direction, because the burden, even the ongoing chronic burden of that, is emerging as a very significant health cost, particularly for pregnant women. So giving a TED Talk, writing articles, do we need to stand on our head? What is it? It's tough. And nobody wants to be the bearer of bad news, and just going around saying at every speech you give, oh, this awful thing is going to happen, because we also need to talk about the incredible success in global health of, Gavi and Global Fund and primary healthcare investments. So we need a very positive message to go with this. But, I'll bet if we took a vote here, we'd allocate substantial resources for epidemics. And then, how do we get out to a broader set of people? I'm going to the Munich Security Conference partly so that people, I think bioterrorism is this scary thing. But potentially, if people understand that the investments against bioterrorism, against natural epidemics, and to improve our situation on the diseases that are out there, that you can get sort of a triple benefit, and not just vaccines, diagnostics, antibodies, antivirals. I think there's a role for all those things, even antibody factory AAV type things, because of the low latency involved, I think has particular promise. So CEPI, and that's one thing we're, I think, trying to do a good job in this announcement, saying that CEPI is a great step, but if people think, okay, put a check mark next to, epidemic preparedness, that's overstating what the focus is.
And you're optimistic about the new administration understanding how huge this problem could be?
I think we should all engage in all the new members of that administration, because I think there's a lot that's up in the air, more than is typical.